The Premier League is back, and Fulham have started the season in dramatic fashion, as a late Rodrigo Muniz goal salvaged a point from the Amex against Brighton. This is how it happened. Nothing out of the ordinary from the starting 11. Josh King started in the 10 off the back of a good pre-season. Alex Iwobi started on the left over Emil Smith-Rowe. Calvin Bassey filled in at left-back because of injuries sustained to Anthony Robinson and Ryan Sessegnon, with Jorge Cuenca starting beside him at left centre-back. And Raul Jimenez started up front instead of Rodrigo Muniz, who's been linked with a move away. In terms of the performance, I don't think it was a very good one, which is sort of what you expect in the first game of the season, and to be fair, Brighton away is always a tight and close encounter. For large parts of the first half especially, there were some nice moves going about, especially down the right-hand side, with that triangle of Joachim Andersen, Kenny Tete and Sasha Lukic being able to beat the Brighton press and giving a lot of space for Harry Wilson to operate in. However, majority of our play would be down the left-hand side, usually started with a crossfield pass from Andersen to Iwobi. Unfortunately, though, there was a serious lack of threat in the final third. We were certainly missing Anthony Robinson's overlapping runs, as attacks would often lead to backwards or sideways passes from Iwobi, since Calvin Bassey wasn't offering much going forward. What didn't help was the performance of Raul Jimenez. Looking at the average positions, you could see Raul dropping so deep to the point where when Wilson and Iwobi were in threatening positions, they had no help or anyone to cross the ball into. Raul's performance can be summed up in him losing all 8 of his duels in the match, making life easy for Lewis Dunk and Jan-Paul van Hecke. Josh King was definitely our brightest attacking spark, and it was a big statement from Marco Silva to start him in the 10. He had a good pre-season, and him getting a new 4-year deal was absolutely vital. His performance showed that he belonged on the Premier League stage, especially when you consider who he was up against in Carlos Baleba. In his first 2 Premier League starts, he's been voted as man of the match in both occasions. I think the entirety of the defence deserves credit. Calvin Bassey for filling in at left back, and whilst going forward we certainly missed Anthony Robinson, defensively Bassey was immense. Completely locked up Yakuba Minter, even with being on a yellow card from the 31st minute. Jorge Cuenca was quality, and he's someone who's probably not had the game time that he would have hoped for, but it's difficult to get in front of someone who was voted player of the season last year. But Cuenca this year is definitely going to play a big role, especially during AFCON, where there will be huge expectations on Bassey's Nigeria to go far in the tournament. I thought Joachim Andersen had one of his best games since returning back to Fulham. Defensively, he was solid and was a massive help in getting us up the pitch with his long diagonal balls. And Kenny Tete is stalwart as always, keeping Matoma fairly quiet. It's great seeing him still in a Fulham shirt after interest from Everton in the summer. Brighton opened the scoring early into the second half, and it was nothing but a clumsy challenge from Sander Berge, bringing down Jorginho. Perhaps he can consider himself somewhat unlucky, but it's also clever play from Jorginho, who's pulling on Berge's shirt in the process, and whilst it's not a foul, it forces Berge to lose his balance and make the tackle. The penalty is then converted by former Fulham Academy alumni Matt O'Reilly. But I think we should have also had a penalty of our own when Ayari goes through Josh King to play the ball. The referee, Sam Barrett, didn't see it that way. He saw it as a coming together, and to be fair, at that point, I don't think there's enough in it to overturn the original decision through VAR. But I think if the result did stay 1-0 to Brighton in the end, Marco Silva would have been spending a lot of time in his interview talking about the referee. But luckily, Rodrigo Muniz, with his 7th goal as a Premier League substitute in the 96th minute from a corner, salvaged us a point on the south coast and celebrated brilliantly by first jumping into the Brighton end and then also lifting up a Fulham scarf, which saw him get booked in the process. And it's difficult to talk about Rodrigo Muniz without talking about his situation at the club. I think most Fulham fans before the match would have been resigned to Brighton away being his last ever match in a Fulham shirt, and it still might be, but since the match, positive news has come out and that he may even now be staying. He's been of transfer interest all summer from Leeds United, who are looking to add quality to stay in the Premier League. Newcastle United are looking at possible replacements for Alexander Isak, and most recently Atalanta, who are looking to replace Matteo Retegui and possibly Ademola Lookman, and would be able to offer Champions League football, which is the reported reason as to why Muniz wants to leave. From a financial standpoint, I sort of get it. with the whole PSR situation, and £50 million, which is what we're asking for, is a lot of money for someone with only a year left on his deal, albeit we have an option to extend by a further 12 months. However, you do have to take into account that Flamengo would be owed 25% of the deal as part of our transfer agreement in 2021. Now, in my opinion, I don't think we should do this deal because I genuinely believe that Muniz can be the guy who can be our 20-goal-a-season striker for us. It's just a matter of finding that consistency. Even when we first signed him in August 2021, when he didn't even speak a word of English, he's shown his technical ability. And to be fair, it's difficult to have an impact when you have someone in front of you scoring 43 goals and breaking a championship record in Alexander Mitrovic. But if you watch his brace against Blackburn and his brace against Stoke, which was two brilliant finishes, then you know his technical ability and finishing has always been there. It's just been about adopting to the English game and becoming a more mature and smart striker, which is certainly what he's done under Marco Silva, who, in my opinion, is the perfect manager for his development. You don't get goals like this one against Brighton, the one against Liverpool at home last season, or Chelsea at Stamford Bridge on Boxing Day if you're not a good striker. You don't have one of the highest goals per minutes in the Premier League if you're not a good striker. And you certainly don't win the Premier League Player of the Month if you're not a good player. And so even though he's one of the lowest earners at the club right now, I'd be happy to make him one of the highest if it meant we got another 4 or 5 years out of him. I also think he complements Raul Jimenez so well, and those two are the perfect strikers for our club right now. Raul, whilst his performance at the weekend wasn't great, you only have to look back to the previous weekend when he scored a brilliant free kick against Frankfurt, and he was also a huge part of Mexico's Gold Cup win in the summer. And so even at 35 years old, he's still capable of playing at a decent Premier League level. And I think his experience that Muniz would be able to still learn off can make Muniz more consistent, and he can take over Raul as the guy who can start the majority of matches for us this season. And the final reason as to why I think we should say no is because there's less than 2 weeks left of the transfer window, and we haven't had a great deal of transfer links full stop, let alone to strikers. And the one concrete link that we've had so far is Mehdi Taremi, and I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be thrilled having him and Raul, who are both on the decline, being in their early to mid-30s. I don't fancy them being our two strikers for at least a couple months. We still need to get a couple of players on top of that, with Muniz replacement if he goes. And clubs would be well aware of that, and we would have to massively overpay for someone who's probably not as developed as Muniz. A final word on the Brighton match then, as we look at the match stats. Had Muniz not scored, I probably would be sitting here saying that we can't be too disappointed at the result because of the lack of attacking threat we showed in the match. But then again, I do think the draw was the right result. Quite an even match when it comes to all the stats. Even the XG if you take away the 0.79 for the penalty. So then, looking at the squad and with there only being 2 weeks left of the window, what do Fulham need to do? Well, we're the only Premier League club who haven't signed an outfield player, and the other was a 35-year-old backup keeper who we got on a free transfer. Regardless of whether Muniz goes or not, Fulham fans have been saying we need a third striker to replace Carlos Vinicius. I don't think we need another striker. Carlos Vinicius only played a handful of games last season and made no impact in any of them. Just was literally elbowing defenders for the sake of it. And so I don't think we would necessarily be missing anything if we didn't sign a third striker. If push comes to shove, we can put Aaron Lopalo by there, who's been doing bits for the U21s, got a hat-trick the other day against Sutton United, scored at the weekend against Arsenal U21s, and was also involved in the first team pre-season in Portugal. But I would say, having watched him in pre-season, he is a couple of EFL loans away from being first team ready. What I do think we definitely need is a winger who wouldn't be afraid to take on their man and is technically great and would also be a goal threat. I think this was made evident, especially in the second half of last season, with the drop-off to Alex Iwobi, who will be going off to AFCON this year, and also the injury to Harry Wilson. Hopefully he can stay injury-free this season. Whether Kevin can come in and be the guy, I don't know. I can't say I know much about him. I don't watch Shakhtar Donetsk, but 45 million euros is a hefty price, and surely there's a player there to be worth something like that. It would be a club record signing if he does come in for that amount. Possibly a backup left back, as I would like to see Cesc being used more as a winger. And also, I don't particularly have much confidence in his defensive ability. I guess he was okay in the back five we used at Molineux last season, but any other time we were using a back four, I didn't think he was particularly great. Right back, I think we're fine with Castagne for another season, and I think next season we should be looking to integrate Luke Fougerols, as I do think that the right back position is going to be the pathway for him into the first team. And finally, a midfielder, whether that be an 8 or 10, someone of real quality and someone who can be a goal-scoring threat, because that's something we definitely missed as well last season, a threat from midfield, because Andres Pereira, he wasn't great last season in terms of goals, and most Fulham fans don't rate Pereira. I am one of those Fulham fans, and Lukic and Berg didn't offer much going forward either. It can be an 8 or a 10 because King himself has said he is also comfortable as an 8, but I would like him to be in the 10 so he can have that freedom. I also think from a defensive standpoint, I don't think he's maybe physically ready to be an 8 in the Premier League. And so finally, looking at the league table, there's not much to look into with it only being match week 1, but we are 8th at the time of recording, which would be a Conference League spot should England finish top 2 for UEFA coefficients and no one below us winning the Carabao or FA Cup. Next up, we've got Man United as the main event of Super Sunday next week, and I think Man United, even though they lost, were the better team against Arsenal, and no matter how well we play against them, they always find a way to get a result against us. So it is going to be a tough match. Hopefully, though, we can come out on top and find our first win of the season. But that's going to wrap up for the first match review of the 25-26 season. Follow me on all my socials and see you next time.